You know what's fascinating about wealthy people? They don't manage their money the way most of us think they do. While everyone else is trying to figure out which cryptocurrency will explode overnight or obsessing over stock market headlines, truly wealthy people follow a system so simple it almost sounds boring. And honestly, that's probably why it works. I'm Susan, and I've spent years studying how people with real wealth actually handle their finances. What I found isn't some secret hedge fund strategy or insider investing trick. It's a basic formula that works whether you earn $30,000 or $300,000 a year. Today, I'm breaking down the exact framework that separates financially successful people from everyone else. It's called the 15-65-20 rule. And by the end of this, you'll know exactly how to apply it to your own life. This isn't theory. It's a practical structure that builds wealth over time, and it's simple enough to start using before your next paycheck even hits. Here's what makes this powerful. Most people assume wealth management is complicated because the financial industry benefits from that belief. The more confusing it sounds, the more likely you are to hand your money over to someone else. But the fundamentals of building wealth haven't changed in decades, and they're simple enough to explain clearly. Wealthy people understand something most people miss. It's not about how much money you earn, it's about what happens to that money after it lands in your account. You can make six figures and still feel broke if you don't control the flow. Meanwhile, someone earning far less can quietly build real wealth by following the right structure. So let's break down the 15-65-20 rule. These numbers represent percentages, and each one has a specific job. Think of it like a financial recipe. You wouldn't bake a cake by tossing random ingredients into a bowl and hoping for the best. Your money works the same way. The first number, 15%, is the foundation. This is the portion of every dollar you earn that goes to your future self, not to bills, not to shopping, not to lifestyle upgrades. This money has one purpose: to work for you while you sleep. And I know 15% can sound intimidating, especially if money already feels tight. But here's the shift that makes it doable. That 15% serves two critical roles, and understanding them makes it much easier to commit to setting it aside. The first role is building your financial safety net. Your car breaks down the week after you've paid all your bills. You get an unexpected medical expense. Your company downsizes, and suddenly you're updating your resume. Without a financial cushion, these situations don't just create stress, they create panic. Now, you're not only dealing with the problem itself, you're scrambling to figure out how to pay for it. That's when people reach for credit cards or take on debt that lingers for years. But when that 15% has been quietly building in the background, those same situations become manageable. You fix the issue, adjust, and move forward without blowing up your finances. And that peace of mind alone is powerful. The second purpose of that 15% is where real wealth starts to form. This money shouldn't just sit in a savings account earning almost nothing. It needs to be invested so it can grow. That's where compound interest steps in. It's one of the most powerful forces in finance. When your money earns returns, and then those returns earn returns, you create a snowball effect that can turn relatively modest contributions into something significant over time. Let me show you how timing changes everything. Imagine two people, Sarah and James. Sarah invests $10,000 at age 30 and earns a steady 6% annual return. She doesn't add another dollar for 20 years. By the time she turns 50, that $10,000 has grown to more than $32,000. James waits until he's 40 to start. He invests $2,000 every year for 10 years and earns the same 6% return. By age 50, he's contributed $20,000 total, yet his account is worth around $28,000. Even though James invested twice as much money, Sarah ends up with more simply because she gave her money more time to compound. And that's the quiet power behind consistently setting aside that first 15%. Here's what's so interesting about that comparison. Sarah invested half as much as James, yet ended up with more. The difference wasn't brilliance or better investments. It was time. Those extra 10 years of compounding did all the heavy lifting. That's why the 15% rule becomes incredibly powerful when you start early. Even relatively small amounts can grow into meaningful wealth if you give them enough time. And here's the beautiful part about compound growth. It accelerates. The gains in year 20 are dramatically larger than the gains in year 5 because you're earning returns on a much bigger base. Now, the obvious question is, where should that 15% actually go? Not all accounts are created equal. Wealthy people understand that the government provides specific investment accounts with built-in tax advantages to help you grow money more efficiently. If you have access to an employer retirement plan with matching contributions, that's usually the first place to start. An employer match is essentially free money. If your company matches up to 5% of your salary and you're only contributing 3%, you're leaving part of your compensation behind. That match is an immediate return before your investments even grow. Beyond employer plans, there are individual tax-advantaged accounts designed for long-term investing. In the United States, that includes traditional and Roth IRAs. In the United Kingdom, ISAs serve a similar purpose. These accounts allow your investments to grow without ongoing tax drag, which can add up to tens of thousands of dollars over decades. The strategy is straightforward. Maximize tax-advantaged accounts first, then invest in regular brokerage accounts if you still have money left to deploy. It's essentially using every available advantage before moving on. Now, when it comes to how this money gets invested, this is where people expecting something flashy might be disappointed. Wealthy investors tend to keep it simple. Instead of chasing stock tips or trying to time the market, they often use diversified index funds that track the broader market. These are passive investments designed to grow steadily over time without constant tinkering. It's not exciting, but it's incredibly effective. Instead of trying to pick one winning company, you're buying a small piece of hundreds or even thousands at once. It's like choosing the sampler platter instead of betting the entire meal on one dish that might disappoint you. The beauty of this approach is that you don't need to become a market expert or spend hours analyzing earnings reports. You're not trying to predict which company will dominate next year. You're investing in the overall growth of the economy, which historically has rewarded patient investors over long periods. And just as important, index funds typically come with very low fees. That matters more than most people realize. A fund charging 2% per year might not sound dramatic, but over 30 years, those fees can quietly cost you tens of thousands in lost growth. Wealthy investors understand that consistency usually beats brilliance. They'd rather earn steady, compounding returns than take big swings and risk major losses. It's not flashy, but it works. Now let's talk about the 65% portion of the rule, your core living expenses. This is where people either gain control of their finances or slowly lose it. The challenge is that expenses have a habit of expanding to match your income. You get a raise and suddenly your apartment feels too small. Your perfectly reliable car doesn't seem impressive anymore. Vacations that once felt special start feeling standard. Before long, you're earning more but feeling no more secure. Economists call this lifestyle inflation. I think of it as income drift. Just like work expands to fill the time available, spending expands to fill the income available. The 65% cap is your protection against that drift. By setting a clear boundary on how much of your income goes toward housing, transportation, food, insurance, and other essentials, you preserve room to save and invest. It forces intentional choices instead of automatic upgrades every time your paycheck increases. Now, I'll be honest, keeping your core expenses at 65% isn't always easy, especially in expensive cities where rent alone can swallow 40 to 50% of your income. But constraints can be powerful. They force creativity. Maybe that means getting a roommate to cut housing costs. Maybe it means a slightly longer commute for much cheaper rent. Maybe it means buying a reliable used car instead of financing something brand new. These choices aren't glamorous, but they create breathing room for wealth building. The key is knowing what truly counts as a fundamental expense: housing, transportation, groceries, utilities, insurance, and other real necessities. Streaming services, frequent dining out, premium subscriptions, and impulse buys belong in a different category. Housing is usually the biggest slice of that 65%, and that makes sense because shelter isn't optional. But there's a difference between having a comfortable place to live and stretching for the perfect one. Many wealthy people intentionally live below their means early on because they understand that an extra few $100s a month in housing can turn into tens of thousands in lost investment growth over time. Transportation is another major lever. The average car payment in the U.S. is now over $700 per month, which is wild when you consider the car is depreciating every day. A dependable used vehicle might cost closer to $300 monthly. That $400 difference, if invested consistently, could grow to over $60,000 in a decade at reasonable returns. Suddenly, the shiny new car doesn't look nearly as impressive. Food is where discipline really shows up. Yes, you need to eat, but you don't need daily takeout or premium brunch habits to survive. Wealthy households often treat restaurant meals as occasional experiences rather than routine defaults, cooking at home more often and being intentional about where their money goes. The goal isn't to live like a monk or eliminate everything enjoyable. It's about being intentional with essential spending so you create space for both wealth building and enjoyment. And that leads to the final piece of the 15-65-20 rule. The 20% portion might be the most underrated part of the system. It's the category people sometimes feel guilty about, yet it's what makes the entire plan sustainable. This is your dedicated money for fun, travel, hobbies, entertainment, upgrades, spontaneous plans, whatever genuinely adds joy to your life. You might wonder why financially successful people intentionally reserve money for enjoyment instead of investing every spare dollar. The answer is sustainability. People who try to save every extra cent often burn out. It's like following an extreme diet. Eventually, you snap and overindulge. Financially, that can look like abandoning your plan altogether after months of restriction. The 20% rule prevents that binge and regret cycle. When you know a portion portion of your income is explicitly meant for enjoyment, you can spend it without anxiety or second guessing. That psychological freedom is powerful because building wealth is a long game. You need a system you can follow for decades, not one that collapses after 6 months of high motivation. Wealthy individuals understand that a sustainable plan you consistently execute beats a perfect plan you quit. And interestingly, research supports this idea. People who allow themselves structured spending flexibility are far more likely to maintain their savings habits over the long term. It sounds counterintuitive, but giving yourself permission to spend can actually make you better at saving. That 20% can cover everything from your daily coffee ritual to occasional shopping or real vacations without feeling like you're stealing from your retirement. The key word is intentional. You're not overspending by accident and feeling guilty later. You're deliberately setting money aside for enjoyment because life isn't meant to be endured until some distant day when you finally feel rich enough to relax. Where people go wrong is swinging to extremes. Some skip this category entirely and try to save every spare dollar, which usually leads to burnout and resentment. Others label nearly every purchase as part of the 20%, which defeats the whole structure. Wealthy individuals respect the boundary. When the 20% is used up for the month, that's it. They don't borrow from next month's fund budget, and they definitely don't dip into the 15% meant for their future. This is where boring consistency becomes powerful. Now for the uncomfortable truth. The 15-65-20 rule is simple on paper, but it can feel unrealistic if you're barely covering expenses. If you're spending 90% of your income just to survive, this framework might sound discouraging. But financial change doesn't require a dramatic overnight overhaul. It comes from small, consistent improvements. Wealthy people didn't make perfect choices from day one. They made slightly better choices repeatedly. If 15% isn't possible yet, start with 5%. If 65% for essentials feels out of reach, aim for 75% and gradually reduce it. The exact numbers matter less than building the habit of intentional limits. Once you prove you can stick to boundaries, you can adjust toward the full system. One of the best features of this approach is that it scales with your income. When you get a raise, each category grows in dollars but not in percentage. That protects you from lifestyle inflation while still letting you enjoy progress. And here's something worth remembering. Most wealthy people didn't begin that way. They started as ordinary earners who discovered simple systems like this and had the patience to follow them long enough to see results. The difference isn't luck or genius, it's consistency. The 15-65-20 rule isn't a secret reserved for billionaires. It's basic math combined with discipline, which ironically makes it rare. Start with what you can manage. Stay consistent. Let compound growth do the heavy lifting. Your future self will either thank you or wish you had started sooner.